The conference room on the 34th floor of Vantage Group smells like fresh leather and old money. I walk in quietly, wearing a plain cream blazer. No name badge. No assistant. Just me and the notebook I carry everywhere. 12 people are already seated around a black oval table. I take the only empty chair near the middle. The man at the head looks up. His name is Alec Dunmore, managing director of Vantage Group, polished, confident, used to deciding who matters in a room. He studies me for 2 seconds. Then he asks, loud enough for everyone, "Are you from catering?" 2 people smile. A woman lifts her water glass to cover her mouth. Let me tell you who I am. My name is Amanda Webb. I am 51 years old. I have spent 17 years building a private investment fund from nothing, beginning with a £4,000 redundancy check and a desk in Brixton. Today that fund holds £340 million. It controls 34% of the deal on this table. No, I say. Alec raises one eyebrow and turns back to his team. Someone check if our investor representative has arrived. We need this room ready. 15 minutes into the presentation, he gestures toward me without looking. Could you fetch some water from the side table? Some of us have been here since 7. I stand. I pour the water. I set it in front of him and return to my seat. I open my notebook and write one word on the first clean page. Noted. This was not the first time I walked into a room and was not seen. 22 months before that morning, I sat alone in a quiet Mayfair office above a townhouse. No plaque on the door. No receptionist. Just 2 chairs, 1 desk, and 14 years of deliberate invisibility. To the financial press, I was barely a name, a rumor attached to 3 acquisition funds that appeared, executed their terms, and disappeared before anyone could get a quote. To my bank, I was the sole signatory of BEA's Promise Fund, named after my mother, who died with nothing. I had built it from that £4,000 redundancy check, a shared Brixton desk, and 17 years of refusing to be managed out of rooms that did not want me. That morning, I was reviewing a prospectus for a small green technology company called Groundwell Tech. They had developed a carbon-negative building compound, a material that could change how affordable housing was constructed. Nobody was watching them yet. I only watched companies nobody was watching. I picked up the phone and called my advisor. Draft the terms, I said. Silent investor clause. Standard conditions. He paused. You know that if they find out mid-process who you are, everything in that room changes. Yes, I said. That is the point. I had already studied Vantage Group carefully. I knew Alec Dunmore's track record, the female associates who left without explanation, the deals that succeeded because of people whose names never appeared in his speeches. I did not choose Vantage Group despite knowing all of this. I chose them because of it. People always want to know what drives a woman like me. The answer is not complicated. My daughter Imani is 24, living and working in Cape Town. We speak on Sundays. The calls are warm but short in the way calls become short when someone has learned not to wait for a parent who is always mid-deal or mid-flight. I have not always been the mother I planned to be. On my desk sits one photograph. Not of a contract or a skyline. It is a picture of my mother, B, sitting outside a house in Peckham that no longer stands. She is squinting into the sun, holding a mug of tea with both hands the way people hold things they know are temporary. B cleaned offices for 30 years. She emptied the bins of people who never once used her name. She died at 62, still paying someone else's rent. I promised her something before she passed. Not money. Not a house. I promised I would sit at the table, properly, at the head if necessary, and I would not move for anyone. I did not come from money. I studied at night while working 2 jobs. I failed at business 3 times before anything held. I was told, repeatedly, to lower my expectations. I never did. On the morning of the Vantage meeting, I stood before my mirror briefly. Then I left every piece of jewelry in my flat, put on the plain cream blazer, and stepped out the door. I wanted to know, one last time, who they were, before I showed them who I was. Let me explain how the trap works. By the time Alec asked me to fetch his water, it had already been set for 6 months. Through a Luxembourg holding company listed in the acquisition documents as BWP Capital Partners, my fund owned 34% of the Groundwell Tech deal. Enough to stall, redirect, or kill the finalization. The stake appeared on page 41, paragraph 9. 3 lines. Easy to overlook if you only read the summary. Alec only ever read the summary. Fiona Walsh, Vantage's head of legal, had flagged it in a pre-meeting briefing 9 days before. Alec waved her off. Luxembourg shell, probably a pension fund. Get the ink on the page. Fiona emailed him the following morning. He read it and did not reply. There was a second mechanism buried in the preliminary terms both parties had already signed. It was called a representation of authority clause. It stated that any material stakeholder present at the final signing must be formally identified. Failure to disclose, even by staying silent, voided the agreement and triggered a penalty review. Alec had signed those terms without noting the clause. I had not written it specifically for him. My legal team had used the same structure twice before. Both times the other side missed it. Both times I quietly hoped they would read carefully. They never did. I watched Alec arrange his papers at the head of the table, completely at ease, and felt the particular sadness that comes from being right about someone. There were 12 people in that room. Not all of them laughed. But 9 of them said nothing. I have spent my whole career learning to tell those two groups apart. There was Tara Baines, Vantage's head of sustainability. The moment Alec made his catering comment, she looked straight down at her laptop. Not smiling. Not laughing. But silent. Tara had been at Vantage for 6 years, the first woman of color to reach director level there. She understood what it costs to speak in a room like that. She had also learned, painfully, what silence costs instead. There was a junior associate named Owen Rafferty who stared at his phone throughout. He was young enough not to understand yet that the moments when you look away from someone else's humiliation follow you home. And then there was Fiona Walsh, head of legal, who was not looking away at all. She was watching me with quiet, careful attention, the expression of someone working out a calculation. Midway through the presentation, she leaned forward. Alec, she said calmly, I think we should clarify investor representation protocols before we continue. Alec did not look up from his slides. Not now, Fiona. The room barely shifted. But I saw Tara glance up for 1 second. Owen put his phone face down, and at the far end of the table, the young analyst who had not smiled once since I arrived set his pen down and wrote something instead. In my notebook, I wrote Fiona's name. Next to it, I drew a small star. Alec had been presenting for 30 minutes when the first crack appeared. He moved through slides with energy, quoted figures from memory, and spoke with confidence. He talked about Groundwell Tech not as a living company, but as an asset to be processed. The social impact framing is our positioning angle, he said. We package it with ESG language for the institutional buyers, build the press narrative around sustainability, and move toward close. I wrote the word package in my notebook and drew a line beneath it. Kezia Borland had spent 11 years in a converted Bristol workshop, building a carbon-negative compound that could replace concrete in affordable housing. She had not spent those years creating a positioning angle. She had spent them trying to fix something broken in the world. I had met Kezia 3 years earlier at a business conference in Lagos. We spoke for 4 hours over dinner. She said, I do not need a buyer. I need someone who understands what this work is for. I said, let me find you one. Listening to Alec call her life's work a packaging exercise, something cold and quiet settled in my chest. I had felt it before. I knew what to do with it. I set down my pen, waited for a natural pause, and spoke for the first time since sitting down. What is the plan for the founding team once the acquisition closes? Alec stopped. He looked across the table as if he had forgotten I was there. I'm sorry, who are you, exactly? I let the question sit in the air for a moment before I answered. I am the person, I said, whose answer to that question will determine whether this deal closes at all. The room went very quiet. Alec produced a short laugh, the kind designed to make someone feel small. But when he looked around the table for the room to laugh with him, nobody did. Hugh Norris, Vantage's chief financial officer, was sitting 2 seats to Alec's left. He had not laughed. He was watching me with the careful attention of a man who had just noticed something he did not recognize and was trying to identify it before he reacted. I slid a folded piece of paper from my notebook across the table toward Hugh. I had written 2 things on it, a single capital figure, and 3 words beneath it, BEA's Promise Fund. Hugh picked it up. He read it once, then read it again. The color in his face did not drain. It rearranged itself, like furniture shifted in a room he thought he knew. He looked up at me. I held his gaze. Alec was still talking. He had not noticed the exchange. The secondary term's close on Friday, he said. The BWP capital position converts and the deal is fully consolidated. It is a formality at this stage. It is not, I said. He stopped again. The conversion requires my signature, I said. And I have not given it. Silence spread across the table like something spilled. And this time, nobody moved to clear it up. The room shifted in the way tides shift, not with a crash, but with a slow, steady pull away from the shore. Hugh Norris placed the folded paper face down on the table. He folded his hands. Then he said, in the measured tone of someone choosing every step on thin ice, I think we should take a brief recess and verify the representation of all parties before we proceed. Alec looked at him as though he had just been pushed. We are 20 minutes from close, Hugh. We are not stopping. Alec. Hugh's voice dropped lower. Recess. Now. The silence that followed was of a very specific kind, the kind that forms when one person in the room still believes they are in control, and everyone else has quietly moved on. Tara Baines closed her laptop. Not because anyone asked, because she understood, the way people with good instincts do, that the meeting was already over in every way that mattered. Owen Rafferty had put away his phone entirely. And Leon Asante, the young analyst at the far end of the table, who had not smiled once during the humiliation, was typing under the table with quiet, deliberate speed. Alec stood. He straightened his jacket. 5 minutes, he said. He turned to his assistant. Get me Fiona. She's already in the hallway, the assistant said quietly. Alec looked at me then, properly, for the first time, not with the dismissiveness from before. With something different. Something that had no performance in it at all. Something much closer to fear. He came back wearing a different expression. He had assembled it quickly, a careful smile that said whatever had just happened was a misunderstanding, and that if we both agreed to be relaxed about it, reality would cooperate. He sat down next to me. Not at the head of the table where he belonged. Beside me. Uninvited. Amanda, he said, using my first name as though he had always known it. I think we got off on completely the wrong foot today. I had no idea who you were and that is entirely my fault. I am embarrassed. Yes, I said simply. You should be. He continued, undeterred. With the right conversation, I believe we can still reach a close today. You have seen the numbers. The opportunity is real. And a woman of your expiry. Please do not finish that sentence, I said. Still calm. Completely still. Leon Asante spoke from the far end of the table before Alec could find another angle. Mr. Dunmore, he said carefully, I think we should allow Ms. Webb to lead from here. Alec looked at Leon. Then at me, then down at the black surface of the table. Of course, he said. And settled back into his chair. It was at that moment that my phone buzzed in my pocket. I excused myself quietly. In the hallway, I saw the name on the screen and answered before the second ring. It was Kezia Borland. And her voice told me immediately that something had changed. Amanda, Kezia said. I need to tell you what I found out this morning. Her voice was steady in the way it gets steady after someone has been crying and has decided to stop. There is a secondary restructuring plan, she said, an internal document. An analyst leaked it to a journalist I know. Vantage intends to strip the patents from Groundwell Tech after the close, move the intellectual property into a separate holding company, and dissolve the founding team within 18 months. I stood completely still in the hallway. The plan was not illegal. In certain acquisition structures it was not even unusual. That was precisely what made it devastating, the fact that it had a name, that it had a slide deck, that people like Alec could look at 11 years of careful, purposeful work and see only a component to be extracted and monetized. The social housing application, I said. Gone, Kezia said. They do not want to build with it. They want to warehouse the patent and collect licensing fees. No deployment. No housing. Just revenue. I closed my eyes for a moment. My mother had cleaned offices and buildings exactly like the ones Kezia's compound could replace. I thought about that until the thought became clear and cold. Who else knows about this document? I asked. The analyst who leaked it. You. And me. Give me until the end of today, I said. I ended the call. Straightened my blazer. And walked back into the room. I walked back in and saw it immediately. Leon Asante had moved seats. He was now beside Fiona Walsh. Neither was speaking. But on the table in front of Leon, face down, was a printed document. I could see one corner clearly, Vantage Group's internal branding, the layout I recognized from the restructuring plan Kezia had described. When the meeting adjourned for a longer break, Leon and I found ourselves alone at one end of the table. He slid the document toward me without a word. I turned it over. 42 pages, printed and tabbed. His own handwritten notes filled every margin. I looked at him carefully. He was 27. He had joined Vantage 18 months earlier from a renewable energy consultancy, believing the sustainability division was doing real work. He understood within 4 months that it was a presentation layer, slides designed to reassure investors while the actual acquisition logic continued unchanged underneath. He had stayed. He had collected. Quietly, carefully, the way I once described to a business school audience as converting every slide into information. How long have you had this? I asked. Long enough, he said. I was waiting for the right moment. I studied him for a moment. You took a significant risk. I know, he said. But I figured that anyone who named a £300 million fund after their mother was not here purely for the return. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said quietly, I need you to send one email. Right now, before the meeting reconvenes. He opened his laptop without hesitation. To whom? Leon asked. I slid a business card across the table. He looked at it. His eyebrows moved just slightly. It belonged to the Financial Conduct Authority's ESG Compliance Division. They have a public tip line, I said. Use it. While Leon typed, I opened the restructuring document to page 11, the patent transfer section, and read through it slowly. I had seen language like this before. I knew what it meant. When the meeting reconvened, Alec returned composed. He went back to figures, projections, multiples. The language of value stripped of all context. I let him finish. Then I spoke for 4 minutes. No notes. No slides. No raised voice. I explained that BWP Capital Partners, the entity Alec had dismissed as a Luxembourg pension fund, held 34% of the acquisition vehicle. I explained that under the representation of authority clause in the preliminary terms, my presence at today's meeting did not simply create a procedural issue. It voided the preliminary terms as executed. There was no signed agreement. There was no Friday close. There was no conversion. The clause was on page 41, I said. Paragraph 9. In the document you signed 3 weeks ago. Alec's mouth opened. That clause was never intended to. It applies to whoever the language describes, Fiona Walsh said. Her voice was quiet and completely final. I flagged it twice, Alec. In the briefing. And in an email. The room went silent in the way it does when the truth has arrived, and there is nothing useful left to say. Hugh Norris cleared his throat. He looked directly at me, not at Alec. Ms. Webb, he said, if the terms were reset entirely, would your fund remain interested in this acquisition? That depends, I said, on whether Vantage Group is still the right vehicle for what needs to happen here. Then I told him what I actually wanted. I was not there to destroy the deal. I had never been. My fund operated on a 5-year minimum horizon. What Groundwell Tech needed was not a buyer planning to extract and leave. It needed a patient partner who would keep the founding team in place, leave the patents within the company, and allow the compound to be deployed rather than stored. 3 social housing sites, I said. Publicly tracked. If the model holds, and I believe it will, we structure a scale round in year 3. Hugh was writing. Fiona was writing. The interpreters in the corner had stopped packing their bags. What does the founder want? Hugh asked. I will let her speak for herself, I said. But she deserves to know what was planned for her work before she agrees to anything new. Silence settled across the table. And Alec's role going forward? Hugh asked carefully. I picked up my pen. That is a matter for the Vantage board. I said nothing more, but in a room of people trained to hear what is not spoken, everyone present understood the rest of what I had left unsaid. I closed my notebook and stood up. I stepped outside the Vantage building and breathed cold air for the first time in 4 hours. My phone rang before I had walked 10 steps. The number belonged to a financial journalist named Zoe Hartley. I had read her work for 3 years. She was sharp, fair, and had no patience for statements that said nothing. Amanda, she said, with the directness of someone who had already written the first paragraph. I have a source inside Vantage who has given me the restructuring plan and an account of this morning's meeting. I am calling you for comment before I file. What is your headline? I asked. Right now, female investor behind £150 million deal mistaken for catering staff at Vantage signing. A brief pause. But the restructuring plan is the larger story. ESG misrepresentation. Patent warehousing. Founder displacement. That is the article worth writing. I thought about Kezia and what a news story could do to a deal still in renegotiation. I thought about Leon's email, already sent. I will not comment on the meeting itself, I said. But I will give you an on-record statement about long-horizon impact investment, founder retention, and the gap between how ESG is labeled and how it is actually practiced. Zoe was quiet for 2 seconds, the silence of someone doing fast calculation. That is the better story, she said. I know. May I name you? Use my full name, I said. And my title. For the first time in 22 months, I did not need to be invisible. That season was over. The article went live at 8 that evening. By midnight, it had been shared 40,000 times. By 7 the next morning, Vantage Group's board had called an emergency session. Alec Dunmore was not invited to the first hour. Fiona Walsh told me what happened inside that room, several days later. By the time Alec arrived, 3 decisions had already been made: an internal review of the Groundwell Tech acquisition terms, a formal audit of ESG compliance across all active Vantage deals, and a written request to Alec explaining why the representation of authority clause had not been raised with leadership before the signing meeting. Fiona's email, the one Alec had read and never answered, had been retrieved, printed, and placed at every seat. It was timestamped, unambiguous, and 9 days old. Alec's response was to call my presence in the room an ambush and the clause a technicality designed to manufacture leverage. It was leverage, said Vivian Obi, the board chair. She had led 3 public companies over 20 years and had no patience for men who used the word ambush to describe the consequences of their own negligence. That is what investment strategy looks like. She identified a clause in a document you signed and chose not to read. What would you like us to do with that? Alec had no answer that worked. Vivian looked around the table. The question is whether we want to save this deal. If we do, we have 48 hours. Get Hugh and Fiona on the phone to Ms. Webb. Not Alec. Hugh and Fiona. I drove to Bristol before dawn with 2 coffees and Kezia's address on my phone. She was already in her workshop when I arrived, the same one she had worked in for 11 years. It was a converted unit on an industrial estate, walls covered in test sheets, structural drawings, and photographs of housing estates from 4 continents. She looked at me when I walked through the door. Is it over? The original deal is over, I said. What comes next is yours to decide. I told her everything. The real restructuring plan. The clause that voided the preliminary terms. The emergency board session that morning. The 2 alternative investment vehicles my team had quietly put in contact with her legal advisors overnight, one a long-horizon infrastructure fund in Singapore, one a consortium of African development finance institutions. Neither would touch her patents. Both required her to stay. Kezia sat down on the wooden stool she had used for 11 years. She picked up one of her material samples, a small gray block, lighter than it looked, and turned it in her hands. My grandmother lived in one room, she said. 7 people. The building flooded every single winter. I did not speak. I had my own version of that sentence. I had carried it for a long time. Which fund is stronger? She asked eventually. Singapore is patient capital. 12-year horizon. Impact first charter. And Vantage, if they come back? They have 48 hours to make a better offer than both. Kezia set the block down carefully. Then let them work for it. The next 48 hours moved the way money moves under real pressure, very fast and very quietly. Hugh Norris and Fiona Walsh worked through both nights on a restructured term sheet. They removed the secondary restructuring plan entirely. They wrote founder retention in as a firm condition, not a preference. They extended the deployment timeline by 3 years and stripped every clause that gave Vantage the right to monetize Kezia's patents independently. At 11 o'clock on the first night, Fiona sent me the draft with a note. This is what the deal should have been from the beginning. I am sorry for the parts one should have pushed harder on. I read it twice. Then I replied, you pushed twice. I noticed. Send me the version after Alec signs. 4 hours passed, then a message, he has not signed. He says founder retention compromises exit valuation. I replied, then the Singapore fund closes with Kezia on Thursday. The next message arrived 11 minutes later, he has signed. On the second night, Leon submitted his formal whistleblower disclosure to the FCA, not only for the Groundwell Tech transaction, but for 2 other deals he had been documenting quietly for 9 months. I did not need the details. I recognized the expression of someone putting down a weight they had carried too long. I sent him one message, you did the right thing. Whatever comes from this, I will make sure it counts. 46 hours in, Vantage submitted its revised proposal. I read it in my Mayfair office, beside BEA's photograph. I read it twice. Then I called Kezia. It is good, I told her. Not perfect. But good. What would make it perfect, she asked. I looked at the photograph on my desk. Bea in the Peckham garden, squinting into the sun, holding her mug with both hands. One more clause, I said. A public commitment. The compound goes into an affordable housing development first, a real site, not a pilot. Named, with a confirmed completion date. On the record. Will they agree? She asked. Let us find out, I said. Hugh Norris presented the clause to the Vantage board at 8 the following morning. It required that within 24 months of acquisition close, Kezia's compound be used in the construction of at least one affordable housing development, planning permission secured, construction commenced, and publicly announced. There were objections from 2 non-executive directors who reached for phrases like operational risk and reputational overreach. Vivian Obi placed her hand flat on the document. We have had significant reputational exposure in the last 72 hours. Our choice is not between risk and safety. It is between the kind of risk that means something and the kind that means nothing. This clause means something. The vote passed. Hugh called me afterward. Before he gave me the result, he said something with no corporate language in it at all. What happened in that room on the first day was not acceptable. I should have said so at the time. I closed my eyes for 2 seconds. You are saying it now, I told him, that counts. I did not engineer what happened to Alec Dunmore. I did not need to. The Financial Conduct Authority opened its inquiry into Vantage Group's ESG practices 6 weeks after the Groundwell Tech deal closed. The inquiry was not primarily about that transaction. It was built on the 2 deals Leon had documented over 9 months and a third that surfaced from an entirely separate source. A pattern of conduct. Not a single error. Alec resigned before the inquiry concluded. 4 lines in an internal email. No event. No announcement. No stage. He was not prosecuted. The evidence did not reach that threshold. But his name, which had once appeared in industry features alongside words like visionary and forward-thinking, now appeared in a different kind of publication, the kind that boards and asset managers read quietly before extending an offer. I read the news on a Tuesday morning and felt very little. Not triumph. Something quieter. The absence of a weight I had carried so long I had stopped noticing it was there. I thought about him once, wondering if a different version of him existed, one capable of making better choices if anyone had truly required it. Probably not. Some people mistake a room's silence for permission. They keep mistaking it until they cannot. Instead, I turned my attention to an email from a woman who had read Zoe Hartley's article, wanting to share the company she had been building alone in East London for 4 years. She apologized for writing without an introduction. Do not apologize for reaching out, I wrote back. That is how everything worth building begins. 6 months later, a conference room near London Bridge. The table is oval. Natural light. On the walls are building plans, the Groundwell Tech housing site, and a diagram Kezia annotated by hand. 12 people are seated. Kezia Borland. Leon Asante, now at a regulatory advisory firm in a role he never had to ask for. Fiona Walsh, who left Vantage 3 weeks after the deal closed and is now general counsel at my fund. Tara Baines, who wrote to me after Zoe's article, 1 paragraph, honest and brave. Some I have known for years. Some I met because of one morning in a room where a man pointed at a water jug and expected me to pour it. I stand at the head of the table. Exactly where I have always belonged. Before we begin, I say, I want to be clear about what this fund is for. We take the long view. We believe that what something is built for matters as much as what it returns. We are going to build differently. I open my notebook, the same one from that morning, and find the first page. The word I wrote while Alec Dunmore thought I was there to serve him. Noted. I draw a clean line through it. Not in anger, in finality. Then I turn to a new page and begin. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who needs it. If you have ever been dismissed before you were known, the table is bigger than they told you. You have always been allowed to sit at it.